City politics colliding with policy and priorities. The new budget works its way forward, and we'll talk with Finance Committee Chairman Nick Howland about what to expect in the River City. Unexpected, the tragedy of domestic terror and a racially motivated mass shooting in Jacksonville. Anger spilled over, even directed from and at people trying to fight for their community. We're tackling some of the tough issues with Jacoby Pittman of Clara White Mission and Pastor John Allen Newman on This Week in Jacksonville. Thanks for being with us today. So we begin this morning with a very emotional issue, in many ways a very complex topic, and yet it's something so many of us say we can't really understand. We're talking about the racially motivated shooting in Newtown 2 weeks ago, where a shooter with white supremacist beliefs targeted and killed 3 black people in a Dollar General store. So first of all, it's terrible. It's terribly emotional too. So I'm joined this morning by Pastor John Allen Newman, pastor here in Jacksonville, 40 years now. Also with us, Jacoby Pittman, leader of the Clara White Mission and a member of City Council. So I'd like to just start here. Jacoby Pittman, John Newman, the emotions were rising when the governor came the day after the shootings. He appeared and then spoke at this gathering the day after this shooting. Pastor, this is something that you were kind of organizing, right?
Well, actually, Jacoby more so organized it, but she asked me to work with her in the organization of it, and kind of a fluke, actually, what happened was Jacoby had communicated to me earlier, which I forgot about, you'll see in a second, that the governor was coming. We didn't know. So this to be very clear, she didn't invite him to come. He came. And so it was not a whole lot of lead time from finding that out. And so when we got to the program, and I saw 3 names. It was the governor's, it was T.K. Waters, and it was Mayor Deegan. And so when she indicated earlier in our conversation that he was going to be there when we first found out, but he was not going to be called on to speak, he was going to be acknowledged. When I saw the program, when I got time to get up to that part of the program, I mistakenly forgot he was to be acknowledged but not speak. So the fluke was, I called him to come up to speak, and so what happened after that and what was said, of course, she can address that. But I need to really clarify for people to know that she didn't invite him to come. It was not some kind of grandiose scheme. That was actually a mistake I made by misreading the program.
And the reason that we're here and talking about this, I appreciate you clarifying what happened there, is because at one point, matter of fact, we've got video here, the crowd, when Governor DeSantis got up to speak, the crowd was very vocal about it, and to the point that nobody could hear, I guess, the governor speaking, and so you stepped in, right?
I stepped in.
What was the reason for that? Because the criticism that has come your direction is that you weren't allowing the people to have a voice in that moment. That clearly wasn't your intention, right?
Absolutely not. And I will tell you that the crowd, they had every reason to be angry, upset, because of what had happened the day before. But unfortunately, I have been criticized, threatened about the whole situation. And
this is video from a few days after that, and this is one of those instances of criticism directed toward you, right?
Correct. And really what I wanted to do was to diffuse what was happening, to bring some civility for the families who were there and the survivors. And I want the community to know that, the reason why I did that is I wanted us to honor the families. That's who we were there for. We were there for the survivors as well. And I don't want it misunderstood that I stood in the gaps of the families and the governor, is because when we started talking about gifts, I've worked in nonprofit, Ken, for 35 years. And when we talk about resources, we talk about gifts, lead gifts, for our organization.
That's the language of philanthropy.
It is.
When you're a nonprofit and someone
Absolutely.
Blesses you,
Absolutely.
That's a gift.
Absolutely. And so, in the heat of the moment, I was emotional. Yeah. I wanted the families to get what they needed, and I wanted to make sure that the faith members who were there to talk about and pray for the families. So, in hindsight, if I offended anyone, I apologize. I have a heart for this city and people that know my work. I've done it for 35 years, and I never want to divide our community by words. And so, that's why we're here today. Pastor has been a faith leader in my life for a long time. So has Bishop McKissick. I want us to get through this because we have work to do in my district. I have 4 districts into one. And so I want to make sure the assignment that I have and the support from the city council, that gets done. And I don't want politics to play a way of not getting the work done. The resources are needed in my community because they've been left behind, Ken, for so long.
That's District 10.
It's District 10.
And so, again, I appreciate you clarifying, hey, here's what I was trying to do in that moment. Pastor Newman, I had Mayor Deegan on our show last week, and we talked a little bit about this instance with the governor showing up and speaking and the reaction he got. So let me ask you, Pastor Newman, Mayor Deegan last week said she was glad that the governor was there, glad that he got to hear the pain of the community. So is it possible that this is a net positive? Is there some kind of good that can come out of what obviously was a contentious situation?
I think absolutely. And the reason why I say that is because, of course, our representatives, Angie Nixon and Tracy Davis, have done a good job of representing the community and representing how the community feels in terms of legislation and their opposition to it. But the governor had never heard from the people.
Yeah.
And in that moment and in that instant, he heard the pain and the anger and the frustration of immediately after George Floyd's death, the HB1, I believe it was, about how to assemble and clamping down on protest. You're looking at the rewriting of Black history.
You're talking about the policies under Governor DeSantis.
Under Governor DeSantis. Those policies that are all targeted to African Americans. And the heinousness of it is some of this was going on during Black History Month, some of these targeted policies. And when you've wounded a community over and over and over and over again, it's almost laughable when someone says, why don't you see why we say Black lives don't matter as much as other lives? Because in the minds of sick people, when you attack a community over and over again, you send a message that they have been devalued and it's okay to harm them. And that's the fury that was there. And that's the escalation that you heard. And actually, what Jacoby did, believe it or not, it de-escalated the situation.
And as what I've heard you say is that was your point, was to try and bring it down a little bit. Hey, let's have some civility and not further wound the survivors and the families, right?
And also that was not a trade for the booze. I think it's important, when you have individuals that many people at that time, where you're bringing unity together, when you're bringing the sheriff together and you're bringing the mayor together, we're all standing in solidarity, where we want unity and we want our community to heal. I mean, not only our community, but the families, that have experienced this.
Absolutely devastated in that moment.
We have families and some of the survivors that have not even been out of their house since this event happened. It's tragic, it's unjust, it's in disbelief that people are afraid, even to go in stores now. Even I'm looking over my shoulder right now. It's something in the community that we gotta get past, and we have to also invest resources to help the community heal. We have the First Coast Relief Fund, who is helping raise money to make sure that these families are getting better long term, to have a sustainable plan. These families, they'll probably never get their life back.
Well, I definitely want to lean into what you just started down that path right now. So let's take a commercial break. And I want to talk more about this in just a moment, because there are some efforts locally to try and attack the issue of racism, try to bring people together. Let's talk about that next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And thanks for staying with us this morning. Pastor John Allen Newman, Jacoby Pittman, both here with us as we talk through a tough issue. President Joe Biden was in our area following the Dollar General shooting, and he made a statement here. Here's part of it. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say this clearly. Hate will not prevail in America. Hate will not prevail in America. Racism will not prevail in America. Domestic terrorism will not prevail in America. And to make it real clear, silence on this issue, both public and private, in the private sector, silence is complicity. That was President Joe Biden just a week ago. So as we come back out and knock this around a little bit, tough questions to answer here, tough questions even to ask. So let me throw it out. How did we get here, even beyond the acts of this one man who attacked innocent people because of the color of their skin?
I think it goes to what I was saying a little earlier. The atmosphere that's been created is one in which a community is constantly under the barrage of policy attacks that sends messages. And you combine that with a media culture on the far, far, far right that take this 21-year-old crazy young man who did this. What was he listening to? What was he watching? What was feeding into his spirit? If he gets a continual diet of hatred and racism and animus and replacement theory, that the browning of America means the white race or the white ethnicity is going to somehow be diminished and lose their place, that creates serious racial tension, particularly when people go into silos listening to what's going to be their confirmation bias. I think it was Enrique.
So listening to just what supports their thoughts.
Absolutely.
Already. I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
I do
right.
want to show this. Governor DeSantis was back in Jacksonville this week, and in an appearance to talk about COVID restrictions and freedom, someone in the audience argued that the governor's policies contributed to the killings in Newtown. Specifically, a black man who said he's an Air Force veteran, he told the governor, he says he feels that DeSantis enacted policies that hurt people like myself. So he said, quote, "You have allowed weapons to be put on the street into immature, hateful people that have caused the deaths of the people who were murdered a couple of weeks ago." This was the governor's response.
First of all, I did not allow anything with that. Well, listen, excuse me. I'm not going to let you accuse me of committing criminal activity. I am not going to take that. I am not going to take that. So you want to have a civil conversation, that's one thing. Try to say that I'm letting, that guy was Baker acted. He should have been ruled ineligible, but they didn't involuntarily commit him, and so they weren't. No, there is the truth. There is something about the truth. It's not everyone doesn't have their own truth. No. You don't get to come here and blame me for some madman. That is not appropriate, and I'm not going to accept it.
Jacoby Pittman and John Newman. So what do you think about this? Obviously, they disagreed, clearly.
Absolutely. I thought that the veteran had every right to share his feelings because he has fought for this country. He was being very intentional and direct to the governor to say your legislation, your laws have hurt people, and it continues to hurt people. And you know, as Pastor said earlier, we're in a culture where it's all right. People feel that it's all right to hurt other people, and it's not. And for him to be there regardless of how he felt at that particular time, his voice was heard. He's basically telling the governor, I'm tired of being sick and tired of what's happening in our country. And it hurts, and we have to handle it from a local, state, and federal way to make sure that we weigh in on what's happening to our country.
Yeah. I want to point this out. Before the Dollar General shooting happened, this event was planned. I want to show you about Together Against Hate, Promoting Unity in Our Community. So this is Jewish Community Alliance and the First Coast YMCA. They're creating a speaker series, and it begins this Thursday. Here's some of the info. I know they would love you to attend, but this is one element. What are some things that can happen in the community that promote unity, not division, coming together, not focusing on somebody looks or acts different than me?
We had some conversations yesterday amongst ourselves as pastors, along with our mayor, about how do we move forward. what can we do to meet these needs? And the consensus was things such as what you just put on the screen are important, but it's also important for churches particularly to take the time to develop a relationship with a congregation that is not African American. Begin conversations. You and I have been a part of some conversations.
Right.
Begin having conversations, not because of total agreement, but because you get to see or hear someone else's perspective, their existential context, and you start viewing them as not other, but you start viewing them as neighbor. We have to do that and be intentional about it. Not for a minute, not for just a reaction, but we have to make that a part of an ongoing part of what we do. Rabbi Glasser and I are working together on formulating some, relationship building. We've already had some relationship already, but that's one of the things that came out of it. This build relationships and break down walls by us getting to know each other.
Yeah. As we've talked over the years about the need for taking steps forward, because it feels like we've just been sliding back in terms of race relations in these last few years, especially the last 3. So I appreciate your suggestion. I appreciate your input as well.
Thank you.
I think we understand each other. We want to see our community go forward, especially on such an important topic. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ken.
All right. So the transition to a new administration in the River City hit some speed bumps recently. We're talking about the budget disagreements, and we'll do that with the chairman of the city's Finance Committee. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Jacksonville City Councilman Nick Howland is back with us. Councilman, you lead the very important Finance Committee. Very important here because you're charged with reviewing Mayor Donna Deegan's budget proposal. How did the budget review process go, and where do we stand now?
Yeah, Kent, first, thanks for having me back. August in Jacksonville is budget month, so the City Council owns the budget. We reviewed over $7.8 billion of revenue and expenditure, about 1.7 in the general fund that we turn over to the mayor after the budget is approved, and then the rest in special funds and also the independent authorities, JEA, the ports, the airports. This council recognizes that government revenue doesn't grow on trees. It's literally extracted from the bank accounts of the citizens. So we reviewed that budget line item by line item over the course of the month of August. And I think what we've finished with is a very fiscally responsible budget that's good for the taxpayers of Jacksonville.
So the mayor's office has kind of pushed back this week. They sent out a news release and, hey, here's some video from a year ago when the chief administrative officer at the time said, hey, our budget is thin right now because next time there's a new administration, they should be able to build out their budget as they want to. What are your thoughts on that? Because the Mayor Deegan and her staff are saying, hey, we deserve to play at the same level as the Curry administration 2 years ago before they trimmed everything in the final year.
Yeah, and you're talking about $232,000 move we took from the mayor's office and put into the Jacksonville Human Rights Commission. Before we talk about that, let's talk about a little bit about perspective. So the $1.7 billion general fund budget, in that we funded all of our top priorities, including fully funding JSO, putting 40 more officers on the streets, fully funding Jacksonville Fire and Rescue, record infrastructure investment, including roads, drainage, septic tank removal in our urban core. We also took $60 million of cash, unprecedented, and put it towards a capital budget so we don't have to take out debt, and we funded the emergency reserves. We did all of that being fiscally responsible without increasing the property tax rate. In fact, we kept the property tax rate steady. So this argument about that little movement of funds from the mayor's office is $232,000 out of the $1.7 billion budget. The equivalency of that, if you take out a couple zeros, is 23 cents on $1,700.
One of the things that was rejected or not approved or what have you was this Director of Diversity and Inclusion position.
Yes.
The last two segments, you just heard us talking about what happened at the Dollar General and racial disharmony that's happened in our city.
Yeah.
Isn't now the time for Jacksonville to, like other cities around the state and the country, to have someone who focuses on diversity and inclusion?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Jacksonville is a mosaic of different races and cultures and communities, just like the United States is, and that's our country's strength, it's our city's strength. And we did not eliminate the chief of D&I. We eliminated funding of the chief in D&I because...
What's the difference there?
Well, the difference is we just took money away from it and put it somewhere else. And we did that because it was redundant. The chief of D&I, the way it was couched to us was that it was a outreach into the community to foster conversations about diversity. Jacksonville's Human Rights Coalition does that exact thing. In fact, I brought their description directly from their website. It says the JHRC sponsors and facilitates community conversations on a variety of issues that serve to foster a deeper understanding of other racial, ethnic, religious, and cultural norms. In fact, the day after the horrific shootings in Newtown, Dr. Rudy Jameson, the chief of the Jacksonville Human Rights Commission, was at the Jesse fostering a community conversation about that horrific, tragic incident.
So your perspective, council's perspective is, hey, we're not going to fund that because it's already funded in a different way.
Yeah, well, actually, earlier in the budget hearings, the Human Rights Commission had come to us and said, hey, we're having difficulty processing all the investigations, in EOC investigations that we do on a daily basis. Our numbers, headcount numbers are down from where they used to be. So what we did was eliminate a position for one person at $232,000 and turned around and created 2 positions at the Jacksonville Human Rights Coalition. So I think that's a better use of taxpayer money.
And I appreciate the time in explaining some of that. We'll have more conversations because we're leading up to a vote coming soon about the budget for the year. Nick Howland, City Councilman, Chairman of the Finance Committee, thanks for your time today.
Kent, thank you very much.
All right, so next week, Jacksonville City Council President Ron Salem. And we're also talking with Rick Mullaney from JU's Public Policy Institute. This Week in Jacksonville airs each Sunday morning at this time. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17. You can also find us online at news4jax.com or streaming on News4Jax Plus.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.